Hi everyone, welcome back to Being the Best Version of Yourself. I'm your host, Dr. Kerry Heller. Okay, so you ready to figure out how to become the best version of yourself? So one of the essential things you need to figure out is, first of all, what do you actually need to change? So in other words, figuring out where are there either areas of difficulty or things that could be improved. So it's important to start small. So think about some of the basics in terms of sleep, eating, screen time, productivity. These are a couple of probably the core things that sometimes making a few small changes can in turn bring about a really big difference overall. All right, so once you have identified one thing that you want to start with to make a change on, let's think a little bit about how to make that happen. So for example, if let's say you want more sleep, one way of approaching this is to think about your mindset with sleep. So for example, do you basically get everything done that you need to and use the remaining time to sleep? Technically, that's one way to do it, but if you want to prioritize sleep, think about sleep as if it's an appointment, something where you have to show up at a certain time and you have to stay until a certain time. So, for example, if you want to get, let's say, 8 hours of sleep, maybe you plan to be asleep by 10 and get up at 6. So identifying your mindset on sleep is one of the first steps with sleep. So with sleep, once you've worked on the mindset, the next step is to think about practical ways to make changes. So for example, maybe using a phone app to set a reminder of when it's time to go to bed could be a good way to wind down to get into bed at a certain time. So for example, if you have an iPhone, if you have updated software, iOS 14 at least, you can set it under the health app where there's a bedtime reminder, and so it'll go off at a certain time in advance of whatever bedtime you set to remind you to go to sleep. Another specific example with sleep is to maybe think about when you're trying to fall asleep, what are you doing? So if you're playing on your phone in bed, I don't know, going on Instagram or whatever you're doing, think about that might actually be keeping you up. Or perhaps you have the TV on, you're watching the news or TV shows and wherever, and you're very stimulated. So that again is another example of something that might be keeping you up. So one simple strategy to change what's going on at bedtime is either just turn everything off so it's completely silent, or if you need to listen to something, maybe pull up some calming music or a guided meditation script, something that you can fall asleep to that maybe will help you to fall asleep more easily. Okay, so we've talked very briefly about sleep, and you have a couple of possible strategies you could try. The idea here, too, in general, isn't to, obviously, I'm sure you can come up with a lot of other strategies you could try yourself. A lot of it is thinking about starting small and not trying to do too much at once, because that's often one of the best ways to make changes. So let's move on to another example. So let's think about eating. Obviously, we're going to talk about eating from the perspective of the planning piece and not about the direct nutrient, because that would be something that you probably want to consult a nutritionist on. But in general, if one of your big issues with eating is that you basically go and find whatever's available or you forget to eat, think about that as probably the first step in figuring out how do you solve those issues. In terms of practical strategies for managing issues with eating, once you've identified what the problem is, whether it's just not being able to find stuff that you want to eat quickly and then grabbing whatever's available if it's not the healthiest, or forgetting to eat, think about what you could do to make it better. So, for example, if you have a hard time remembering to eat, perhaps think about structuring your day and having a reminder, in your calendar at certain times to eat. Whether it's for breakfast, lunch, a specific snack, but in some ways planning out meals for a variety of reasons can actually make it easier to remember to eat and to, and also to do a good job with it. Because think about it this way too. If you're planning ahead and you're mindful in what you're eating, and even if you plan out your meals ahead of time, then you're less likely to grab whatever's available and in turn probably eat healthier too. All right, so the last example we're going to look at today is screen time. So first of all, most people have to be on a screen for some stuff, whether it's for work or for other things. It's sort of, in many cases, an essential part of life these days, especially with the whole pandemic going on. But the other thing you want to think about, though, is being mindful of, beyond the times you absolutely have to be on a screen, are there problems with how much you're on a screen and specifically what you're doing? So there's a difference, I think, between doing something that's really productive and goal-oriented, even if it's fun, versus just, spending hours mindlessly, going on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter because you either lose track of time or you just feel like there's nothing else you really want to do. So identifying, is there an issue for you with screen time? So are you missing out on stuff because you're doing it? Is it possible that you're just, more moody because you're on a screen too much? Whatever the issue is, first identify that, and then from there you can figure out how to best solve it. So in terms of how to solve issues with too much screen time, the first thing to think about is how to get greater awareness of how much time you're spending doing things that you feel like you shouldn't be spending so much time doing. Some of the programs, for example, Instagram, have built-in things. They don't really advertise very much, but if you go under settings, there's a thing where you can have it remind you after you've been on for a certain amount of time. You can also use parental control features and set it for yourself. So, for example, if you have an Apple device, you can use a screen time feature where you say after 30 minutes or an hour, wherever you want it to be, that, specific apps, let's say Twitter or Instagram, just deactivates itself. So that's one way to prevent yourself from going on it too much. And you can also set where you can get reminders of how much time you've been on it as well. So there's a lot that you can do, I think, in order to help remind yourself of how long you've been on something. With screen time, another consideration in terms of a practical strategy is to think about maybe finding a replacement. So rather than trying to focus just on the regulation piece of, not being on Twitter for 5 hours a day, think about what you could be doing instead. And then weave in Twitter or other social media or screen time things as just more of a natural occurrence when you have downtime. So for example, maybe schedule some game nights with friends or, get into reading a book, whatever it is. Then this way, you may have some downtime, you can do stuff on the screen, but this way it becomes sort of the extra time you have available they're used for rather than kind of your sole activity all the time. Again, that's only if you feel like how much time you're on a screen is a problem and something that you want to change. Again, with any of this stuff, you shouldn't really feel like you want to, or you shouldn't be as focused on changing stuff if it's not something that you have a desire to or see a specific need in order to address. All right, so now we've talked about how to identify something that you want to change in order to make things better in your life, as well as a couple of tangible strategies of what to do for sleep, eating, and screen time. Now, I would like you to think about something, pick one thing, identify one thing that you would like to make a change on in order to be the best version of yourself. So whether you use the examples I've mentioned, sleep, eating, screen time, whether it's about improving a relationship with someone or being more productive in some way, identify one goal for yourself at this point. I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. Okay. Hopefully at this point you've identified something. If you haven't, that's okay, and you can think about it after. But now, you have some ideas of what to do. So I encourage you, take charge. Take this idea of what you want to change and go forth. Pick a couple of tangible ways to achieve that. And I wish you the best of luck in doing this. Until next time, this is Dr. Kerry Heller. Hope that you've enjoyed this podcast and found it helpful.